It's 2024 and the cost of living in Canada is through the roof. Everything from gas to groceries is way more expensive than it was just a couple of years ago. And the single largest expense that most people have, aka rent or a mortgage, is also breaking records. New data shows that with the rise of interest rates in Canada, the average mortgage payment is up over 40% from the last 5 years. And of course, as a result of that, the average rent prices in a variety of different Canadian cities are following suit. So given the new reality that we're facing, I think it's time to take a closer look at the question of, in 2024, is it better to rent or buy the home that you live in? Also, this video is sponsored by Chexi, but more on that later. So in order to answer this question, we're first going to take a look at the pros and cons of renting versus buying, and then we're going to break down the numbers to see specific examples of when it might actually be better to rent or buy. To start though, let's take a look at the broader pros and cons, because for some people, it's not purely about the numbers. When it comes to renting, the main pro is that you have a fixed cost every month and you know exactly how much you're going to be paying. If something happens to the apartment or home that you live in, you're not responsible for dealing with it, and the landlord has to cover all of those additional expenses. You also have a lot more freedom to move because you're usually only locked in for a maximum of 1 year. And renting also gives you the freedom to invest your extra capital into whatever investments you see fit. You're not locked into one specific market like real estate. Finally, you can also even pay your rent with a credit card if you have a good one and earn points or cashback rewards for that, which is just not an option if you have a mortgage. Now, on the con side, when you pay your rent every month, the money goes to the landlord. You're not building up any equity in the home, and it's basically totally a sunk cost. You also have less flexibility with what you can do with your home. So when you want to sublet it to other people, there's some restrictions on what you can do. You can't necessarily just put it up for Airbnb, and you definitely can't just knock down a wall and remodel if you want to because you don't own the place. Now, on the buying side, let's take a look at the pros. In my opinion, there's something nice about owning a home. It's an intangible feeling, but you definitely have to include that. The main monetary benefit of owning a home is that you get to build up equity in it over time as you pay down the principal of your mortgage, and that is an investment. On top of that though, you also have the opportunity to potentially earn even more if the price of your home appreciates in value or if you use it to generate some sort of rental income. On the con side of owning a home though, of course, you are on the hook for literally everything, all of the variable costs, any maintenance or repairs that you have to do. You have to pay property taxes, you have to pay insurance, maybe condo fees if you live in an apartment building, and that can all really add up. Also, you have less freedom. It's not as easy to pick up and move if you own a place in a particular city than if you're just renting there. And finally, you're also risking your capital by owning a home because, as we know, prices don't always go up. And in 2008, 2009, you had a perfect example of that. So in my opinion, those are some of the larger, more intangible pros versus cons of renting and buying. But before we can actually make a decision, we have to really dig deep into the numbers. So let's do that now. At the end of last year, the average Canadian home was selling for around $650,000, and the average rental price was around $2,200 per month. Now, obviously, it depends where you live in the country, if you're located in a city or in a more rural area, but I'm going to use the average figures for this, and then we can build in a little bit of a margin of error to see if there's any wiggle room. And if you have a specific property in mind that you're thinking about buying or renting, you can rerun these numbers with your exact figures. Now, I'm not going to include things like hydro or paying the internet bill because you're going to have to do that in both situations. I'm only going to look at the differences between the sunk costs for renting versus buying. And it's important to emphasize that we're only looking at the actual sunk costs of both situations. So for example, when you pay a mortgage, a portion of that goes to the principal and actually builds up equity in your home. And that's not actually a cost, that's more of an investment. So we're not including that. So these are the sunk costs of renting versus buying based on the first 5 years. When it comes to the rent, obviously the cost is just the rent payment. But on the buy side, we've got the mortgage interest, which for the first 5 years is going to be somewhere between 60 and 70% of the payment in this circumstance. Then we've got maintenance on the home, and a good rule of thumb is that it's going to be around 0.5% per year for maintenance and repairs. But of course, it really depends on what you're buying, and if it's a new construction or if it's like a 100-year-old house, there's going to be differences in those costs. Then we've got home insurance. Everyone has to pay that, and the average in Canada is somewhere around $1,000 per year. But again, if you buy a small condo, the insurance costs are going to be a lot cheaper than that versus if you're buying a big house. Then we've got the one-time cost to buy, or the closing costs, but we're gonna amortize that over 5 years. This is something I think a lot of people forget, but when you buy a home, you have to pay land tax on that, and also you have to pay a lawyer to look over the documents and to help you close. And usually that's gonna cost somewhere in the realm of $8,000 to $12,000, depending on where it is. But for the purposes of comparing these costs, we're going to divide that over the 5 years, month by month. And then finally, you've got property tax, but also you could even add condo fees if you're buying a condo instead of a standalone home. So that's a lot of sunk costs. Now, based on the average property that we're talking about, which was $650,000, and I've just selected the location here for this demo as Ottawa, Ontario, I'm going to assume that we're putting 20% down because that way we don't have to pay mortgage insurance, which is a big additional cost. So if we put 20% down and we choose the best interest rate that's currently available, the mortgage payment for that is going to be around $3,066 per month. However, based on the amortization schedule, you can see that for the first few years, the amount that's being paid against the principal is closer to 30% of the total mortgage amount versus the amount that's going to pay the interest, which is actually a sunk cost, is $30,000. That gets a little bit better over time, but for the first 5 years, you're paying significantly more in interest than you are in principal. So going back to our little calculator here, out of that total mortgage payment of $3,066, the mortgage interest is going to be basically $2,000 per month. Then the maintenance on a home that costs $650 is going to average out to about $270 per month. The home insurance at the average prices is going to be just over $80 per month. Then if we spread out the closing costs for this home over the 5-year period that we're looking at, that's about $200 per month. Then we've got the average property taxes, but this amount could really vary depending on where you are. And then finally, I haven't even included condo fees in this calculation because I've assumed that we're dealing with a house. But if you add a condo fee of $400 or $500 per month, then that jacks up the monthly sunk costs as well. So even without condo fees, immediately you can see there's a pretty significant difference between the sunk cost to buy the average home in Canada versus the sunk cost to rent. So it really does seem to favor renting on average right now, but maybe this rental is for a 2-bedroom apartment and maybe this is for a 2-bedroom house. But there's still quite a bit of wiggle room for bumping up the sunk cost to rent. So even if you increase your rent to $2,800 per month, you're still actually coming in below the average cost to own in Canada. And I think you can find a decent place to rent for that amount. Plus, we haven't even discussed the extra side bonus yet of renting versus buying, which is that if you actually rent, you can use a service like Chexi to pay your rent with a credit card and earn points on that or cashback or miles. And those extra bonuses can tip the scales even further in favor of renting. So what is Chexi, the sponsor of this video? Well, it's a service available for Canadians that want to pay their rent using a credit card so that they can maximize the points or miles or cashback that you're earning. Now, most people in Canada still pay their rent via e-transfer or check or even cash, but you can actually use a service like Chexi where you pay via a credit card and then they pay your landlord. And that way you can continue to earn bonus miles on your single largest monthly expense, which obviously can really add up because if you're spending $2,200 per month or even more on rent, then that's over $25,000 per year that you aren't putting on your credit card now that you could be getting bonus miles on. Other bonuses of using Chexi is that it helps you build up your credit score as long as you make sure to pay down your credit card balance every single month. And also it simplifies the rent payment because you can set it up to come off your credit card automatically. That way you don't even have to think about it. It automatically pays your rent for you. And the way that it works is that Chexi e-transfers the money to your landlord. So as long as your landlord accepts e-transfers, you can use this service. Now on Chexi's webpage, they've got a little calculator that you can use to see if your credit card is going to be worth it to use this service. They do charge an annual fee of 1.7%, but with many credit cards, it's still worth it to use Chexi to pay your rent, even with that additional 1.75% fee, because the amount that you're putting on your credit card just racks up so many miles. So currently, the best card to use with Chexi, according to their website, is the Scotia Momentum Visa Infinite. But they've got tons of different options on here, and you can check to see what your credit card would yield in terms of bonus points. So if you're interested in using Chexi to pay your rent in Canada and to maximize your credit card points, then there's going to be a link down below in the description and in the pinned comment where you can check them out. And if we go back to our little rent versus buy calculator and put in the fact that you can earn $500 to $1,000 or even more in bonus rewards for paying your rent with a credit card, then it seems to really tip the scales even more in favor of renting right now. So at this moment in time, based on the average figures, it does seem like renting is better than buying. Of course, it really depends on your individual property, and if you find a place that is undervalued where you can get it for cheap, or if you don't have a large mortgage because the interest rates are super high, well then obviously it could be a little bit better to buy. It just depends on your own particular circumstances. Anyways, that is just my take. Hopefully you found this video interesting. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day.